morning, everyone. Good to see all of you here. Thank you very much for the invitation, Joe, Chris. Thanks for those introductory remarks. I'm gonna go probably 25 minutes here with some remarks, and then I'll sit and take questions. I know Joe's got a few that are teed up for me, but I also would welcome questions from the audience, because I think that interaction is probably the best way to see what's on your mind, but also provide you some feedback, or at least my perspective on some of these challenges that we're confronted with today. Again, Joe, thanks a lot for the invitation. Great to see many friends, new and old, here this morning. And I look forward to catching up even in the networking session at the break, or even after 12 o'clock. So, China and the United States, the most consequential relationship this century, and in fact, I would say it's going to define this century, is the one between the United States and China. And there are a lot of things that are going on right now, and this is just I think a fascinating time to be alive. And I think that the country, our people, our sovereignty, our prosperity, our freedoms, our liberties are all being challenged. And I think that it is important to speak about these matters because of the stakes. So I'm going to make some remarks here. Some of this is a bit controversial, and I would welcome actually your feedback on it, and if that helps by addressing some of the questions when Joe and I grab a seat here, then that would be. I think that would be great for just the interaction between the audience and myself. Last night I asked Joe, we were just having a beer going over things, and I asked him to put a map up there. I'm actually not going to refer to the map in the remarks, but when we sit down, I think it is important to talk about it, because a lot of what I'm going to speak about has much to do with the geometry of that geography. One point I want to start with for everyone in here before I get into my remarks is in that area of responsibility right there, and even though Hawaii is generally in the middle of the map and there's a lot of blue there, 6 out of 10 people on this planet live in that part of the planet, in that part of the globe. And by estimates, by 2040-ish, 7 out of 10 people in the world will live in that area of our responsibility. And even though there's a lot of water on that map, there's a lot of humans that live out there. And it's a massive part of the world. And if you have not been out there, for those that have been out there, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But if you haven't been out there, I just want to tell you, it's just, it's something to behold, because it's filled with people, and it is filled with countries, and it's filled with consequences tied to the region, but tied to global security, and of course tied to the United States and the Chinese relationship. Okay, so with that as a lead-in, let me tell you, I'm going to talk about positional advantage and the operational foundation of deterrence by denial. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I want to begin with a basic proposition. The objective in the Indo-Pacific is not war. Our objective out there is no war. But no war does not come from statements, slogans, strategy documents, or simple presence of military forces. No war comes from creating a military problem that an adversary does not believe it can solve. That's deterrence. And in the Indo-Pacific, deterrence will succeed only when the United States and its allies and partners possess the positional, operational, and material advantage necessary to deny aggression from the opening hours of a crisis through the duration of a conflict. That is why I have long advocated for what I call positional advantage. Positional advantage is not simply about where we plan forces or place them. It's about whether those forces are connected, sustained, protected, informed, and capable of producing effects at the time and place of our choosing. It is the military and security framework that binds together the regional architecture. It connects our allies, partners, forces, bases, agreements, intelligence, logistics, fires protection, command and control systems into an operational network. Without that network, we have nothing but locations. We only have platforms. We only have bilateral relationships or exercises or programs of record. But we do not necessarily have combat power. The central question is not whether the United States has forces in the region. The central question is whether those forces can survive, communicate, move, sustain themselves, find the enemy, protect the force, and deliver lethal and non-lethal effects while under persistent attack. This is a very, very different standard, and it is the standard that matters, and the only standard that matters. The Indo-Pacific is a logistics theater. For far too long, the United States has viewed the Indo-Pacific primarily through platforms and service preferences. We talk about ships, aircraft, missiles, ranges, magazines, sensors, and exquisite technologies. And while all of those matter, in the Indo-Pacific, fundamentally, it's a logistics theater that needs that robust backbone. It is a theater defined by distance, time, scale, geography, infrastructure, limitations, political access, contested movement, and enormous consumption rates of combat power. The distances alone should force us to think differently. This is not Europe, it's not the Middle East. There is no continuous road and rail network connecting the force. There's no expectation that large, secure rear areas are going to remain untouched. There's no guarantee that a major port, airfield, fuel facility, headquarters, satellite link, or logistics nodes will remain available simply because it was available at the beginning of the conflict. Every node is going to be observed. Every signature is going to be analyzed. Every concentration of forces is going to be targeted. Every movement will be contested, and every delay is going to matter. Yet we continue to speak about sustainment as if it was a supporting function that will somehow arrive after the operational concept has been developed, and this is wrong. That thinking must end. Sustainment is not a supporting concept. Sustainment is an operational concept. It is not something that follows maneuver, it enables maneuver. It determines the duration, tempo, reach, and the endurance of the joint force. And in many cases, sustainment will determine whether a commander has meaningful options at all. We must stop building operational concepts that assume logistics will simply appear. Fuel does not appear, ammo doesn't appear, repair parts don't appear, air defense interceptors just don't appear. Water, medical support, replacement crews, batteries, generators, communications equipment, maintenance capability, they just don't show up. They must be positioned. They must be moved. They have to be distributed. They have to be protected. We have to replenish them. And this is all going to happen while it's contested. And contested logistics is not primarily a transportation problem. It's an integrated warfighting problem. It involves access, authorities, industrial capacity, pre-positioning, post-station support, commercial shipping, military sea lift, air movement, inland distribution, data protection, deception, engineering, maintenance, contracting, and command and control. All of it has to come together. This is why positional advantage is so important. Position creates options, access, reduces time and distance, complicates the adversary's targeting, allows joint forces to distribute and then converge. Position allows logistics to become more resilient because the force is not dependent on one port, one airfield, one headquarters, or one fuel site. The purpose of positional advantage is not to create a larger target set. It is to create a network that is too distributed, too connected, too resilient, and too operationally useful for an adversary to disable at an acceptable cost. Protection is not optional. This is another uncomfortable truth. We cannot build a distributed force and then leave it exposed. We cannot establish logistics nodes across the theater and assume distance will protect them. We cannot place command posts, fuel, ammo, sensors, launchers, aircraft ships, or personnel forward without holding a serious protection architecture around it. Protection is not a secondary consideration, it's a requirement for positional advantage. And the two most immediate protection challenges are integrated air and missile defense and counter-unmanned aircraft systems. The threat is no longer limited to a handful of ballistic missiles or high-end cruise missiles. The threat includes ballistic, cruise missiles, hypersonic systems, one-way attack drones, surveillance drones, loitering munitions, electronic attack, cyber intrusion, sabotage, special operations, and coordinated and highly coordinated information operations. The adversary will not attack one layer at a time. It will attempt to overwhelm the entire system. It will use inexpensive systems to force us to expend expensive interceptors. It will use drones to reveal the location of radars and command posts. It will use electronic attack and warfare to disrupt communications and targeting. It will attack logistics systems because it understands that destroying fuel, ammo, maintenance can be operationally decisive, more operationally decisive than destroying a simple platform. This is why IMAD and counter-UAS cannot be treated as narrow technical communities. They're central to joint operations, to sustainment, to deterrence, and they are central to maintaining positional advantage. We must think about protection as a layered and integrated system, and that means active defense, passive defense, dispersion, mobility, hardening, camouflage, deception, signature management, rapid repair, redundant communications, cybersecurity, electronic protection, and the ability to reconstitute after attack at point of need. No single interceptor, radar, jammer, directed energy system, or command system is going to solve that problem. The solution is a layered architecture that combines sensors, shooters, electronic warfare, directed energy, kinetic systems, passive measures, and disciplined operational approaches. We should name and assess these systems. We should test Patriot, STAD, NASAMS, indirect protection capabilities, directed energy systems, electronic warfare tools, counter-UAS technologies, emerging sensors, and command and control platforms. But we should not allow ourselves to become trapped in a debate over which a single system is best. This is the wrong question. The right question is what combination of capabilities that one platform, one company, one service, or one program of record, or even one technology can solve an integrated operational problem. It can't. Programs of record should not be protected from reality. They should be challenged by reality. If a program works, scale it. If a material solution is already producing results, insert it into exercise and operational formations. If it performs better than the existing approach, we should not wait years for the bureaucracy to catch up. And if a program does not perform under realistic conditions, we should have the institutional courage to change it, replace it, or end it. The battlefield does not care how long a program of record existed. The enemy does not care how much we have invested. And the American taxpayer should not be asked to continue funding systems simply because the acquisition process has made them difficult to stop. Command and control is the connective tissue of all of this. Positional advantage cannot exist without command and control. C2 is the connective tissue that turns a collection of forces into a fighting formation and a fighting network. But we must be clear about command and control and what it means in this theater, and it is not simply headquarters or command posts filled with screens. It's not a single cop. It's not assumption of constant, reliable, high bandwidth communications. Command and control in the Indo-Pacific must be distributed, mobile, survival, interoperable, capable of operating through massive disruptions. Assume communications is going to be degraded, satellite links are going to be attacked, data is going to be manipulated, headquarters are going to be targeted, assume that units will periodically be isolated. That means commanders and formations must be able to operate with less. They must understand the intent, possess authorities, and be able to communicate quickly. They have to have alternative pathways. They must rehearse integrated operations. They must be capable of continuing to fight when the digital architecture does not continue on and is not designed to. Technology can improve decision making. Artificial intelligence can help commanders process information. Data platforms can connect sensors, shooters, logistics, intelligence, and operations. But data volume is not decision advantage. More information does not automatically create better decisions. Decision advantage comes from obtaining the right information, placing it in context, protecting it from manipulation, sharing it with the correct decision makers, and then acting before your adversary does. The goal is not simply to see more, the goal is to see, sense, track, identify, characterize, discriminate, decide, act, and assess faster than your adversary can. This applies to lethal targeting, non-lethal targeting, logistics, information, and force protection. It applies to the political and information dimensions of competition. C2 must also be interoperable with our allies and partners. We cannot claim to have a regional security network where our systems cannot communicate and our data can't be shared, and our authorities limit us to do that. Interoperability is not achieved because senior leaders attend a conference or because forces participate in an exercise. Interoperability means we plan together, communicate together, coordinate our protection, coordinate our sustainment, and we do that under operational pressure. It requires technical solutions, policy decisions, disclosure authorities early, classification reform, and really at the end of the day it requires trust, and I would say repeated rehearsals of the force. Collection, targeting, and information advantage. This is tied into sustainment. The next element of positional advantage is collection. A force that cannot see cannot fight. A force that cannot understand what it sees can't make decisions. And a force that cannot converge and understand its actions does not possess an advantage. The Indo-Pacific will be one of the most observed battlefields in history. Space systems, airborne sensors, maritime system, terrestrial sensors, open source intelligence, acoustic systems, electronic intelligence, and human reporting are going to provide massive volumes of data. But the process of data does not guarantee understanding. We need a collection architecture that's persistent, layered, and shared. The architecture must support both lethal and non-lethal targeting, and it has to identify threats. It has to help commanders distinguish deception from preparation. It has to enable indications and warnings, support long-range fires, and protect logistics. This is where electronic warfare, space, counterspace, cyber, and information advantage must be fully integrated into our operational approach. They are part of the fight. Space enables communications, positioning, timing, weather, warning, intelligence, and targeting. Counterspace capabilities threaten the systems on which modern militaries increasingly depend. Cyber operations can disrupt networks, logistics, command control systems, and our infrastructure. These capabilities have to be integrated into planning from the beginning. The Joint Force must be able to conduct this lethal and non-lethal targeting at the edge. At times, the best way to defeat an enemy system may be a missile. At other times, it may be an electronic attack. It could be cyber, deception, information exposure, disruption of their logistics networks, and it may be the positioning of forces that changes the adversary's risk calculation without firing a shot. The commander should have options, and the architecture has to be designed to produce those. Regional security operations and regional security architecture is necessary for this theory, but only if the network functions operationally. It has to be measured by what the participants can do together. We need to assess the right locations, right forces, intelligence, nodes, ports, runways, coordinate our fires, move casualties, sustain communications, and these nodes have to be able to operate or at least recover even under attack. Those are the real measures of the security network. The Indo-Pacific has the potential to become the most powerful land power network in the world. The region contains many of the world's largest armies. I'll talk about that maybe at the chat. It contains strategically located allies and partners. It has enormous opportunities for critical infrastructure, ports, airfields, training areas, logistics facilities, and industrial capacity. But we have to connect it. And it has to be integrated through sustainment, C2, and protection. This is how positional advantage binds this security architecture together. This approach should extend from the continental United States across Alaska and Hawaii through the first and second island chains, Republic of Korea, Philippines, Australia, and other willing partners. And as a reminder, America's Day starts at Guam. The United States homeland extends all the way out to the second island chain. It should connect all of the training and all of the exercise together and has to be active every day. Major exercises, not just during a crisis. Not only when senior leaders visit, it has to be on every day. Industry has to be part of this. This is part of a campaign. Industry has an indispensable role, but industry must understand the operational problem first. The services and combatant commands must do a better job of explaining the problem. Too often requirements are fragmented. One community asks for a sensor, another asks for communication systems, an interceptor, logistics platform, software. The result can be a series of disconnected solutions optimized for individual requirements, but not integrated into an operational architecture. We need industry to help solve the network problem. Has to connect these sensors and shooters, sustainment, critical nodes, forward edge nodes. It's got to reduce signatures. We've got to operate through electronic attack, and it has to be able to repair after infrastructure is damaged. How do we create affordable layers of defense so we are not constantly spending millions of dollars to defeat threats costing us thousands? We have to scale our production, repair systems forward, and we have to move from successful demonstration to actual fielding during exercises. Industry should be rewarded for delivering operational outcomes, not just technical performance. A system that performs well in a controlled demonstration but cannot be maintained, integrated, transported, powered, or secured, and or used by a formation under battlefield conditions is not an operational solution. Every experiment should be tied to a problem, and every exercise should be an opportunity to test that material solution. We are dealing with threats that adapt in weeks and months. We can't take years. Our institutions have to overcome these things much faster. The Army must be honest about its role. Let me say a word or two about the Army. I'm not here to defend the Army. I'm here to defend deterrence. And deterrence in the Indo-Pacific requires the Army to understand what it must provide to the Joint Force. The Army must provide command and control, sustainment, integrated air and missile defense, counter-UAS, long-range fires, intelligence collection, engineering, communications, cyber and electronic warfare, medical capability, mobility, protection, and forces capable of operating from the land to affect the air, maritime, space, and cyber domains. The Army cannot define its relevance there by simply moving traditional formations into the Pacific and calling that transformation. Nor can it define transformation through technology labels, organizational slogans, or a series of disconnected initiatives. The Army must transform to fight and win in a battlefield defined by converging observation, range, speed, precision, signature management, and lethality. That transformation begins with doctrine, organizational changes, command relationships, training, planning, force structure, and authorities. The first and most important decision does not always cost money. It's cultural, it's doctrinal, it's organizational, it's decisions about how we fight, it's command, it's sustain, it's distribute. We have to protect, we have to integrate into the joint force, and we have to operate with our allies and partners. These are senior leader responsibilities. These are not responsibilities for company commanders and battalion commanders and brigade commanders. This is what the senior leaders of the Army have to focus on. This is not something we should expect tactical formations to solve. Headquarters have to drive change. More importantly, senior commanders must rehearse their plans. They must know where they're going to receive equipment, how it's going to be sustained, how to communicate. They must know what happens when ports, airfields, headquarters, and logistics nodes are attacked. Readiness must be measured against the mission, and against the plan, and against the threat, and against the conditions under which the forces are going to actually fight. We must create doubt in the adversary's mind. Ultimately, deterrence is a contest of perception. The adversary must believe that aggression will fail. They must believe the United States and its allies and partners can absorb the opening attack, continue operating, deny the objective, impose costs, and sustain the fight. It must believe that our political will is matched by operational capability. It must believe that network that I talked about earlier is real. That our positions are defendable, our logistics is resilient, our command and control systems are going to continue to function, and our forces can find and strike critical targets at will. That our air and missile defense forces can protect key nodes, our allies and partners will act, and that there is no rapid, low-cost path to victory. We do not need to eliminate every adversary option. We need to make every option uncertain, costly, and increasingly likely that it will fail. That is the value of positional advantage. It creates multiple dilemmas. It denies the adversary a single decisive target. It allows our forces to remain dispersed and then able to converge. It supports the joint force from the land and the systems that sustain this campaign, and it improves warning, targeting options, reassures our allies that we are operating in the region and that this is an important difference that we make. Forward presence can't be episodic. Positional advantage is persistent, presence can be symbolic, and positional advantage is fully operational. Positional advantage is measured by whether the joint force and its partners can create effects tomorrow after the adversary has attacked our network. A practical standard that I'll talk about. So let me offer a practical standard for you. Any proposed capability, posture decision, exercise agreement, program of record, or investment should be tested against 4 questions. Does it improve command and control? Does it improve sustainment? Does it improve our ability to collect and target? And does it improve our protection? Notice I didn't say fires. Notice I didn't say maritime domain, air domain, land domain, cyber domain, space domain. Those are not the questions. It is about command and control, protection, sustainment, and collection. If you move anything in the Pacific, if you move anything, fires and maneuver forces, without those 4 foundational capabilities, you are wasting your time. It won't be able to operate out there unless you have those 4 fundamentals in first. Those cannot be afterthoughts. They can't be specialized communities operating at the edge of some worthless concept. They have to be central ideas, because a force that cannot sustain and protect its logistics cannot generate combat power. A force that cannot sustain itself can't maneuver, can't converge, can't target, and it can't go after the enemy's objectives. In conclusion, I think that we're at a consequential moment. As I talked about earlier, the United States still possesses extraordinary advantages. We have a highly capable force. And anyone that questions the reach and lethality of the U.S. military, they do so at their own peril. They do so at their own peril. However, we still need advanced technology. We need a powerful economy. We need deep operational experience. We need a global network of allies and partners. And an unmatched ability to adapt when we are honest about the problems that we do have. Operational advantage must be built. It must be positioned. It's got to be sustained, protected, and rehearsed. And we have to demonstrate it. And we should not wait for a crisis to expose these gaps. We should expose them now and challenge our assumptions, challenge our structures, challenge our concepts, and our exercises. This is not going to be easy. Future fight will not be won by any one service or any slogan. It will not be won by the program of the strongest constituency. It will not be won by a headquarters with a large common operating picture. It will be won by a force that can see, decide, move, sustain, protect, strike, adapt, and continue operating under pressure. Our goal remains no war out there, but achieving no war requires more than hope. It requires a credible ability to deny aggression. Credibility begins with positional advantage, a network of allies and partners, sustained through logistics and resilient logistics, improved by persistent collection, protected by layered air and missile defense, and capable of producing lethal and non-lethal effects across every domain. That's how we bind the regional architecture together. It's how we create doubt in the mind of the adversary, and this is how we deter by denial, and it's also how we preserve the peace. So thank you very much. I look forward to your questions. And again, thank you, Joe, for having me here today.
Can you get your water? Could you hit? I've got one.
one.
You got one right there?
Right there, Chris, yeah. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
How's everybody doing? All right. Good. Thank you, sir. That was, I've got to soak that up. Let me turn this back to the point here. And I'm going to open it up.
And you have microphones on your
Yeah.
desk there.
Good catch. Hello. Everybody here okay?
Yeah.
I read a lot of things that reading of late, that interviews, your papers, and we are so honored to have you with us. First, thank you for coming. But you repeated that. The thing that I want to hit from the discussion that we had tonight is your foundational principle, and I want to get into that. You've repeatedly emphasized that logistics is a linchpin in the Indo-Pacific theater. You characterize it as a linchpin, where distance and geopolitical dynamics make sustainment a decisive factor in joint and allied operations. You describe the Indo-Pacific as a joint theater requiring joint solutions, with the Army as the linchpin force that enables and sustains partners. Would you elaborate and describe what you mean by the Army as the linchpin force?
So I asked Joe to put this map up here because, and to some of the commentary there. So, the bias runs deep, and I know my good friend Rick Mercado is here. But this theater, right, is often it's often referred to as an air and maritime theater. And my counter to that is it's not an air and maritime theater. It's actually a joint theater. So that's like, it has joint problems, and only the joint force is going to solve those joint problems. And the Army and land power is an integral part of the solution to the problems that we have out here. I also talk about the Army and land power, and the reason I use land power is because the Army, the U.S. Army, for those that are not aware, a third of the Army is assigned to U.S. Army Pacific. It has reserve commands under it, but maybe more importantly is the makeup of this theater. And I'm going to run through a couple of statistics here that actually, truth be told, probably many of you don't realize this. Because I know that the American public doesn't, because I know that when I talk to staffers, congressmen, senators, they also don't realize it. The Philippine military, 70% of the Philippine military is its army. It has more divisions than the U.S. Army. Okay? It's 7,500 islands. Indonesia. The Indonesian military is 75% army. It's got 17,500 islands. Vietnam, 80%. Taiwan, 80%. Japan, 65%. India, 80% of its military is its army. I could go on. The point I'm making is there is a natural connection between the land power network that is actually the security architecture of what this theater is often referred to as an air and maritime theater. It's not. It's a joint theater, and the land forces and the land power network, which is the U.S. Army, the Marine Corps, Special Operations, and then the massive armies that sit inside this region. And you get a whole different sense of security in these countries when you operate out in the interior. Okay? That's different than a FONOP at sea, or a bomber task force flyover, or a pairing in the air domain, or out in the maritime domain. Again, I'm not saying that we need a smaller Navy or a smaller Air Force. In fact, just the contrary. And the reason is that the Navy, the U.S. Navy, and the U.S. Air Force keep the global commons open. That is something that land power can't do. Okay? So commerce moves largely secure because the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force keep those global commons open. Okay? So that's an important element of this. But what I am saying is, this is not an air and maritime theater. This is a joint theater with joint problems that's only going to be solved by the joint force. And the U.S. Army, through its history, has a deep connection to these countries. Deep connection. If you look at the Philippine military, it looks just like the U.S. Army. If you look at the Japanese military, it looks just like the U.S. Army. If you look at the Korean military, it looks just like the U.S. Army. And there are a host of other countries like it. Why? Because we had such a large presence, really, from the Spanish-American War. So I'm kind of expanding on the question you asked me, but logistics plays a central role. As I mentioned in there, if you don't have positional advantage through distributed logistics, you're going to have a problem. I'll tell stories while I'm at it. You know, we had 7 vessels afloat out there. Okay, in our APS afloat stocks. That was costing the Army more than $2 billion in our program. Okay, now what weapon systems have the Chinese built? They built an A2AD network, and they have hypersonics, and they have reach. Okay, and they have a deep magazine. With Chris's help and many other people's help, I was like, hey, why don't we take the equipment off of these vessels? Sea Lift Command needs them for recap. You got to bring them all the way back to the East Coast to do any of the maintenance on either the vessels or the equipment we have. 2 of them were loaded with ammunition. 5 of them were loaded with equipment. I'm like, hey, this is what we need to do. Like, let's get the equipment off these vessels, get them back for recap, get the equipment into these locations where we operate, instead of dragging the equipment across the Pacific into these locations. Now we have forward stops. Now we have additive manufacturing. Now we have contractual agreements. Now we have access. And basically, we got $2.5 million back, $1 billion back in the pump. I'll use another one. It cost us, Ed would remember this, it would cost us, we were sending our brigades from Alaska and Hawaii to Louisiana for training, okay, at the cost of $60 million. $50 million was transportation. $10 million was training. Now think about it. And by the way, you were separated from your equipment for
a month.
Well, it could be 3 months.
Yeah, right.
A month to get there, a month on the ground, a month to get back. Okay, so I'm like, we need to be training in the theater. We had a training center in Europe for years. We've had 2 in the continental United States. I'm like, the enemy is not that way. It's that way. Like, why are we going that way? By the way, Louisiana doesn't look anything like Southeast Asia, other than the heat. Okay, but it doesn't look like that. It's not the jungles in Luzon. So the point I'm making is, we have to train in the theater. We have to remain in the theater. We have to operate in the conditions and in the geography that we are most likely to operate in the theater. Same thing with Alaska. Coming out of the Middle East, we had desert-colored equipment up there. We had no capability to operate high altitude, extreme cold weather, mountainous conditions. You want to see something function in 40 degree below zero, then you can, I tell you what, bring industry out there and you can see whether it works there. You need to put stuff in 105 degree temperature with 130% humidity in the jungle and see if it works. Or put it on a vessel, a watercraft moving an inland waterway and then coming out and having to go to another island, and you'll find out whether that equipment, through salt corrosion and heat and humidity, whether it works or not. So if you're doing a test in Fort Bliss or White Sands Missile Range or Nellis, that doesn't look anything like what's going on out there. And so my point was every experiment out there had to have an exercise, and every exercise needed to have an experiment. Because then we could really find out, because the best R&D feedback you're going to get is from a soldier that's actually using it. And you're not going to get the same feedback at Fort Carson, Colorado, or Fort Knox, Fort Riley, or Fort Hood. You're going to get it when you're in Banjarmasin in Indonesia, on the island of Sumatra. That's when you're going to find out whether that thing actually functions or not. So having those stores forward actually gave us an opportunity to rehearse drawing the equipment, deploying our personnel into these logistics sites, and then moving equipment out into the interior. And by the way, the Joint Force benefits from it. It's like Aguila Harbor in the Philippines right now. Because that's now a Joint Theater Distribution Center, but the Army got that thing started with its seed corn. But now it's for the Joint Force. And these are the interdependencies that the Joint Force has from the Army. I told this to Honorable Colby the other day. The Army is the only service that has a 2-star commander in the theater that does sustainment. Nobody else has a commander wearing 2 stars on his shoulders with a staff and with reach to the enterprise of the Joint Force or the Army in the theater. So we're in a natural position to be able to do this and do it well, because we have capacity to do it. And by the way, the bulk of the Guard and Reserve are coming out of the Army. I could go on.
Let's continue that in manner of speaking. You stress that logistics is not a support function,
That's right.
as it is often considered, but a core warfighting capability. Further, that it must be used as central to deterrence and must be prepared for, rehearsed, and integrated into all operational planning. Without logistics as a deterrent, readiness is compromised. Please amplify what you mean, and you touched on that. Amplify what you mean by logistics as a core warfighting function, and thereby a deterrent.
Yeah, I'll illustrate this through a story that Ed was involved in, Chris was involved in, and your headquarters was involved in. So Ed and I were out in the Pacific. I was at DCG at USAPAC, and if you recall, remember the Little Rocket Band period?
Yeah.
Okay. That, the end result of that was another THAAD system was permanently stationed there, but that's really not the story. The story is this, that General Perna and this headquarters here at AMC, we moved 90 days of ammunition to Japan and Korea and other logistics in probably 60 days. And all of that was happening while this, rhetoric and, missiles were being shot, new administration, because this was in the first Trump, it's in the early days of it. And the reason I'm telling you this, and I can't go into any other detail, but that entire situation simmered down when all that sustainment went and was positioned. So, to my remarks, it may not be that you have to fire a shot. In fact, that's the way you want it to be. You want to be able to position things and then say, listen, we have capability, we have posture, we are messaging you, and we're demonstrating the political and military will to actually act. Okay, so those 4 things, in my view, are really what integrated deterrence stands for. Capability plus posture plus messaging plus will. And the will is political will and military will. Now, military will, you could say it like capability, but if you have posture and you put capabilities down and then you message, you take another step, we're going to do something against you, then in my remarks, any adversary that questions the lethality and reach of the U.S. military, they do so at their own peril.
I mean, the U.S. military is an extraordinary, it has extraordinary capabilities. Do we have problems? Of course we do. Do we need manufacturing back? You're damn right we do. I was talking about this with Chris yesterday. For those that have studied China, they went after 10 sectors. Pharmacy, steel, shipbuilding, critical minerals, processing specifically. I could go on. And I'll say this. I actually, somebody asked me the other day what keeps me up at night. When I was in uniform, it was something different. Now that I'm out of uniform, what keeps me up at night is our inability to manufacture, to build things fast enough. Because we don't own our supply chains. End to end. 90% of the processing for concentrate of iron ore, pick a rare earth element or a critical mineral, of which there's now 60, we don't process 90% of that. So Trump takes office, February, 10% tariff. What do? Flood the zone. They countered with putting a chokehold on critical minerals. Same thing in April. And the point I'm making here is, if we can't make batteries, and we can't make magnets, and we can't make semiconductors, because we don't own end-to-end supply chain, we've got a huge problem. And that's what keeps me up at night. And that is tied directly to logistics, because if you think of a semiconductor as your brain, and a battery as your heart, and a magnet as your spine, you can't live without those three. And if you think about that combination of our inability to produce those in this country, then that should keep you up at night. And by the way, this is not going to be built in one administration. We're not going to regain control of manufacturing and raw materials and the processing of those raw materials in a 4-year political cycle. It's going to take years. Why? Because we walked away from it when China went into the WTO in 2001, gave them favored trade nation status, and we said, everybody's boat's going to rise. No, they're not. They're communists. And I'm not against the Chinese people, but I am against the Communist Chinese Party. I'm not talking about the Chinese people. I'm not talking about China and the people of China. I'm talking about the Communist Chinese Party, the CCP, and the military arm that they have created.
You and I, thank you so much for that. I don't know if you're getting as much out of this as I am.
Yes.
I'll tell you what. You and I spoke last night about the similarities, and I'm sure a historian. We talked about the similarities of World War II and our war with China, with Japan. Comparing a war with China to our war with Japan in World War II, distance and dispersion remain central challenges. But modern technology and A2AD threats amplify risks. Forward positioning of stocks are critical. Historical island hopping strategies offer flexibility and redundancy. Multi-domain threats, cyberspace, and long-range fires require integrating across all services and allied partners. And sustainment is vital. To your point, sustainment, so you can't just put them out there. You've got to defend them, you've got to sustain them.
Yeah.
Whereas failure to maintain logistics could halt operations like underestimating supply in World War II forced strategic adjustments. Could you comment on how the Indo-Pacific's contested logistic environment mirrors the World War II Pacific theater in its complexity and criticality, but how modern threats and technological dependencies make sustainment even more challenging today in a potential war with China?
Well, I'm not sure it's more challenging today, but I guess I'll color this with a quote up front. Admiral Ernest King, who was I think at the time he was the acting CEO, he goes, I don't know what MacArthur's talking about with all this logistics, but I want some of it. And I guess the point that I'm making here is that, this is, again, back to our history out there, which, I know we just had D-Day and, everybody, the European continent is a land continent, land-dominant continent with armies, and our history is there, but the Army's history in the Pacific is extraordinary. So, 22 divisions, 6 field armies, 6 field armies. It was the 3rd largest assembly of an army that we ever created. It was massive. And if you've been to places like, I've been to a little island down here called New Caledonia. It's a French, it's the French version of Guam territory, okay? We put 1.5 million soldiers through there in 90 days. I mean, the logistics of this is just on its way up into the Solomon Islands and into the Philippines. The amount of capability that the U.S. Army projected into the Second World War in the Pacific was just, it's extraordinary what we put in place. And to see some of these locations, it's amazing. I'll give you one other story. I've been to the island of Corregidor. Has anybody ever been to the island of Corregidor? Okay, so, and I tell this story because it's kind of like, where are we in the movie of China's rise, okay? I went back out to the Pacific in 2014 after, if you think about it, from 2001 to 2014, it was, I knew where Kandahar, Kabul, Baghdad, Helmand province was, right? Because we were in the Middle East. 2014, I find myself, General Odierno called me. I told you this story last week. He called me and said, hey, you're going to take command of the 25th, good luck. And my brother was the director of DIA at the time, and he called me and he said, Charlie, you should come up here. I'll give you 2 days immersed with the analysts from China. I went up there for 2 days, and I was leaving to drive back to Fort Bragg. I got stuck in traffic, like most people do in Springfield, and after 2 days, I sat there and I said, holy shit, I haven't been watching China for 14 years, and I think I'm actually reflective of the country. I'm reflective of the country. So it dawned on me in a traffic jam, and I was taking command in about a month. This is in April of 2014. This is March, actually. I took command in April. And it dawned on me that I hadn't been paying attention to what China was doing for 14 years. And so that was a call to action for me intellectually to just study what they were doing. Didn't realize at the time that I was going to be the 25th commander, the deputy of USAPAC, Army G3, and then back out as the commander of U.S. Army Pacific. So effectively for the next decade plus, I woke up every day and pointed that way because that's where our adversaries were, primarily China, North Korea, and Russia. And I tell that story because, again, I think I'm reflective of the country. We were a little bit asleep at what was happening. And then I find myself back out there in 2021, and that's 6-7 years later, and you look at the arsenal that they created and the threat and their, I'll say, irresponsible behavior, and I define what they're doing out there as incremental. They've been at it for a couple of decades. It's insidious because they're at the core of them, they're just corrupt, and I mean the Communist Chinese Party. I can tell stories about this. And then the last I is irresponsible. Their behavior out there is threatening, and they demonstrate it every day by ramming boats, flying across center lines, and just threatening things. So any country that is on an incremental, insidious, and irresponsible march, and oh, by the way, in 2015, the year after I went back out there the second time, that's actually when their modernization caught up with their capability advances, their technologies, their rockets. They really started accelerating space and cyber and nuke, and then their land systems, okay? And then they took a page out of our playbook. They built training centers, big training centers. And these training centers were where they started taking their capabilities and their formations and testing all these things out. And now I'm just going to advance forward to my time as a 4-star. The exercises that they were doing they were beginning to really, really scale. To the point where we started, and rightfully so, Admiral Aquilino, Admiral Paparo to this day, well, 4-star, we just started referring to them as they were rehearsing, because that's what they were doing. Conversely, we were not doing that, and we weren't referring to that because it was irritating to our allies and partners. And we need to get over the political sensitivity and say, no, we are rehearsing too. Like, we are moving equipment, we are moving people, we are emplacing tactical assembly areas, we are going to firing positions, we are establishing a joint fires network, we are establishing a joint theater logistics distribution network. We are doing this with our allies and partners. And again, back to the beginning of the movie here, I believe the natural connection in the region and the security architecture of this region is actually defined by land power. Now, I know the Navy centrists and the air guys will push back on that, but the fact of the matter is this. You want to find out what's going on with the security situation in these countries, get out into the interior. See inside of these countries and see what's going on down at the community, grassroots level, because that's a reflection of what's happening sometimes in their capital or not in their capital. And they will tell you whether they want the American presence there and in what size and what makeup and how important it is. And so if somebody, I'm going to stay on messaging. If somebody told me, and here's some things that have been advanced out there because of our work. If somebody told me in 2021 that the Japanese were going to fire a Type 88 land-based anti-ship missile from the Philippines, mind you, remember the history here now, okay? The Japanese flattened the Philippines, okay? They now have formal agreements with the Philippines, and they're deploying their most advanced land-based anti-ship missiles into the Philippines and doing a live fire. Now, they did that because we led the way. The U.S. led the way by having the Typhoon system down there. We did Patriot live fires. We brought HIMARS in there, etc., etc. By the way, the Japanese also just exposed their first land-based Type 12 hypersonic cruise missiles inside of Japan. The Philippines are buying BrahMos anti-ship missiles from India. The Philippines went from 4 EDCA sites to 9 EDCA sites, and even though Aguila Harbor is not an EDCA site, it's basically part of the Luzon economic zone that this administration has just started up because they saw what was happening with Aguila and Clark nearby. And again, the Philippine political leadership sees the threat, and they're responding to the threat because of the way that China is behaving. I mentioned information operations. I just have to talk about this because it's really a challenge for us. So here's a play out of their playbook, and they're doing it in this country too, because you see it in open source reporting. They buy land right next to a military installation or critical infrastructure. Okay, they're buying land. Now I'll stay country agnostic here. But here's what happens: they buy land. They own a telecommunications company. They put towers up on that land. You can guess what those towers are doing. Then they own 7 members of a media company on the board. And then that media company opens up bot farms, and then they grab information and they spew disinformation and misinformation about what the United States is doing, what the West is doing, etc., etc. And you're in a information, cyber, and space war every single day out there. It is contact, full contact, and they don't play. They are very good, very skilled, and this is their game. And they do it inside this country, and they're doing it all over that region because their aim is regional hegemony because they have global aspirations. And don't think for a minute that they're not continuing to try. I know there's a ton of happy talk going on, and that's good. If you're not talking, you're fighting. So I'm excited that the administration is talking because we weren't talking, and that's not a good place to be. So I'm telling you these stories because, back to the very early comments that I made, this century is going to be defined by the relationship between the United States and China. Just like the last century was defined by the relationship between the United States and Europe. This century is going to be defined by ours and I would say Asia. I'm on a roll, so.
There you go.
For those of you that served out there, I'll just I said deliberately in here, because I say it deliberately to remind people that America's day starts in Guam, the second island chain. Okay? Those are American citizens, American nationals. We have an obligation to protect the Northern Marianas, the Marshall Islands, Guam, Palau. I mean, our day goes on. And by the way, if you take a direct flight from Honolulu to DC, it's about 10 hours. You take a direct flight from Honolulu to Guam, it's about 10 hours. You're not even in the region yet. You're in the second island chain. That's how big this place is, okay? It's massive. And so it's really important that people understand the challenge that the U.S. military has, because China has three things that we do not have. They have magazine depth, because they got a lot of weapons. They have mass, because they have a lot of ships, planes, and they got a second largest army in the world after India. And then they have, they're operating on interior lines. Military parlance, they're 100 miles from their objective, okay? We have none of those. So how do we overcome that? And my theory of victory is we have to gain positional advantage. And we have to do that through permanent forces, Korea, Japan, probably some in Australia, definitely some in Guam. Permanency, dynamic deployment, and rotational deployment. We have to throw all three combinations. We have to be a boxer that is really good with a hook, a jab, and a knockout punch, okay? So we have to be able to do all those as the U.S. military. And the challenge in this theater is that if you don't have your anchors of your allies and partners, you're at a loss. You need those access agreements. You need those partners to enable what has to go on. And so the interoperability between our forces and their forces creates conditions for us to have posture, capability, to message what we're doing out there, and then demonstrate the political and military will that we are a Pacific nation. Homeland starts in the second island chain, and our day begins in Guam, and that the consequences of our relationship with Asia and with China are going to determine the outcomes of this century. And that's why hard power, and for too many years, I'll be critical of the Army, for too many years, the only hard power that was really being demonstrated out there was by the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force. We had hard power capability, but we didn't necessarily put it out there. Now, I can make excuses to say we're tied up like a knot in the Middle East. I get it. But the fact of the matter is, bless his soul, he's passed, but General Ordino actually is the Chief of Staff of the Army. He moved the 4-star billet from Europe to the Pacific. That's actually how that command went back to a 4-star, and it made a huge difference. Huge difference. And there were other parts of it. Forces that were assigned, that were going to the Middle East, that were taking off our rotations to the Middle East, so the net gain in the Pacific was greater command and control and greater access to forces. But I would say that we paused a little bit, and we shouldn't have. But I am excited about what we've been doing out there for the last 5 years, and I think that it's had a massive impact. And I think we in the Army ought to give ourselves more credit, talk more widely about the successes of it, and stay on the fact that the land power network in the Indo-Pacific is actually the security architecture that binds that region together. Why? Because it's the central institution in these countries that protects its borders, defends its territorial integrity, and really protects its national sovereignty. They turn to their army for everything. Indonesia, again, 75% of its military is its army. And they're looking to us for multi-domain operations. They want to learn about our multi-domain task forces. They want to know how we sense. They want to know how we strike. They want to know how we do sustainment. They want to come to our training centers. This has a massive impact. They're coming to our schools. I was telling a story earlier today. I was talking to a very critical commander in Taiwan recently. He went to the Citadel. 65% of all the international military education seats in the Department of War are Army schools. It's a massive influence on this region when we send these leaders from these countries back to our officer courses, non-commissioned officer courses, and warrant courses. Those seats are critical. Nobody even talks about it. The influence that the U.S. military, and I would say the U.S. Army has in this region through those schools is extraordinary. We get no credit for it. It's a State Department program that the Department of War supports. It's extraordinary.
Pulling on that comment, those comments, and by the way, I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am, folks. A potential war with China would require sustaining forces over 6,500 miles from the U.S. West Coast to the Western Pacific, with intra-theater distribution across key points like Japan, Korea, Guam, and Northern Australia. Modern logistics must integrate joint and allied capabilities, including updated Army watercraft and prepositioned stocks to counter Chinese anti-access area denial threats. Unlike World War II, contemporary operation must also account for cyber and space disruptions, which could paralyze supply chains even without kinetic attacks. Could you please comment on the existential nature of contested logistics in the Indo-Pacific as it relates to the fragility of U.S. transoceanic supply lines and the reliance on our allies and our industrial dependencies?
Yes. So one of I think the signature organizational change that has happened in the Army in the last, I'll say 7 years, go back. Yeah, 7 years, so 2019-ish, is the multi-domain task force now, I think soon multi-domain command, and the reason I bring this up is it's an organization that's unique in that in the theater, that formation is actually, it's in contact in the electromagnetic spectrum with the adversary 24/7, 365. So it is sensing and seeing and tracking and identifying and understanding what's actually happening in the space, cyber, EMS, and information domain. So it is, and it's very different than what we had been doing before. We didn't have a formation that was present and persistent to be able to do that. So it's understanding what's actually happening in a foreign country, operating forward. And there's an enormous amount of value with an organization that is doing that while campaigning and doing day-to-day operations. So I believe that that organization and the change that it can create has been really remarkable, not just for the Army, but for the Joint Force and for the allies and partners. I sent a note out the other day, again, I'll leave the name of the country agnostic, but they basically are writing about the multi-domain task forces in their own countries to advocate for these kinds of formations to their political leadership because they see the value of what it's doing. Its value is in deterrence. because it's out there campaigning every day, and it's in the electromagnetic spectrum, and it's doing all of the lethal and non-lethal targeting that has to happen during campaigning, because it's too late once the bullets start flying. One other thing about the multi-domain task force, and it's so different than what we've had. It changes command and control, sustainment, protection, collection. It changes every warfighting function that we operate under because it's just a unique formation. But one story that's not often told is we couldn't explain it. We didn't even know. We just went from multi-domain battle to a series of war games, and then it went to multi-domain operations, and then we had this multi-domain task force with an experimental MTO, a TDA. And I remember, actually Secretary McCarthy at the time, he said, we can't explain this thing. And it was actually I was talking to somebody earlier, Walt Pyatt, myself were sitting there with General McConnell and Secretary McCarthy, and we said, well, we need to stand one up and put a commander in charge of it. So off went Jim Eisenhower, now the commander of CAC to JDLM. But what the important part of the story is and the lesson that I took from this was, if we had waited for the hardware to be delivered, if we had waited for us to have an MRC battery with an SM-6 and a Tomahawk, if we had waited for Titan, if we had waited for Hades, if we had waited for HIMARS, PRISM, right, then we would only now be standing those organizations up. So the important part of this was that there's really three things that come together to create new operational concepts: organizations, capabilities, and I put technologies in the middle. Organizations and capabilities are really hard to change, right? It's force structure, and you've got to buy hardware. And so the 3-year advance, the 3-year head start that the multi-domain task force organization had on the delivery of the hardware was really the power of what came out of that. So we basically put an experimental organization out in the Pacific and said, go. And we worked a process to try to deliver capabilities to it on time. And the lesson that I take away from that is that there's risk in changing your organizations, but if you have a new operational concept and you haven't changed your organizations, then you don't have a new operational concept. You actually have to change your organizations. It takes a lot of time, it's very hard, and it's costly. You have to change the capabilities. Those are very costly. But the thing that's happening is technology's changing too fast. And so if you don't stay ahead with your organizational changes, I can promise you the technology is going to get out in front of you, and you'll be playing catch up the whole time. We're on the advent of that right now with AI. And so I believe that what we learned from the multi-domain task force, we're now going to multi-domain commands and putting task forces under it. It's kind of, we're at multi-domain operations, I'll say 3.0. For some of you that you might say it's 2.0, I'm saying it's 3.0 because of where it came from. And you know what? That's a good thing. There should be a 4.0, 5.0, because the enemy is learning just as fast as we are. Technology is changing just almost too quickly. So we have to be able to learn to change our organizations fast and adapt and modify our capabilities very, very quickly, because that's what our adversaries are doing.
Sir, we've only got about 5 minutes left. No, it's been, no, you have, it's fantastic. And I've got a few, and I'd like to go on kind of a speed dating kind of thing here with regard to the major issues associated with supply chains in the context of potential war in the Indo-Pacific AOR. In terms of the distinct but highly interconnected challenges, and I have identified 8 such challenges. There are a myriad of others. It depends on how you slice and dice them. But I'm going to go down through each one, and I'd like to get you to just make a brief comment about each one and how those challenges can be addressed and overcome.
Okay.
Tyranny of distance and time, transit lanes, communications, and the theater of bottlenecks. The tyranny of distance and time is a challenge.
Multimodal solutions. We need air, we need cargo, we need unmanned, we need autonomous, we need forward position. That theater requires it all. So multimodal
solutions is the only way to overcome it. One other thing, you're also gonna need access agreements. You can't do this without the countries in the region accepting your delivery, accepting your position, so,
Adversaries, A2AD, kinetic threats to fixed nodes, as well as interdiction of supply routes. A2AD about adversaries.
we have to position hard power forward yesterday. Hard power is the only way to stop what they're doing. Demonstrating it, using it, shooting it, moving it, sustaining it. They need to see that, because then they'll go, shit, I'm in trouble. And that's what we want.
That's true.
Every day he needs to wake up and go, not today. And that buys time on the clock for us to get that position, expand the capabilities, message what the hell we're doing, demonstrate our political will, and have no war.
We talked about this last evening, but the shift from just in time to just in case, the vulnerability of precision, and I mean that very sincerely, the vulnerability of precision, push versus pull, preposition.
Well, I think I was a senior colonel, brand new brigadier general, and everybody was talking about just-in-time logistics. Right now, we're suffering as a result of that business concept that was brought to the military. Because I'm a fan of the letter P, because it stands for plenty. We need a bunch of shit. And so, like, this is a problem. And by the way, people in uniform, we were asking for more, okay? The military was like, we need more, we need more, we need more. Because just in time for what? Just in time for my position to be compromised, or to have something land on top of me? We're suffering from this. And you add that to our manufacturing base 15 years ago, right? And then you look at, again, steel, pharmaceuticals, critical minerals, shipbuilding, I could go on, 10. You can look it up. 10 sectors the Communist Chinese Party went after. And they own them. So, we're suffering from this. And I don't know, I told a story to somebody the other day. Short range, I told John Rafferty yesterday. We had a SHORAD capability in the United States Army when I came in. All right? Stinger, Chaparral, Vulcan, those sound familiar to you?
Oh, yeah.
We gutted the short range air defense artillery branch. We just got, because for the entire time I was in the Middle East, I never looked up and felt threatened. Other than when a Katyusha rocket was coming at me, but nothing flying was enemy, okay? But the point I made later when I was at G3 was like, we took that branch down in 3 years. It's going to take us 10 years to rebuild it, okay? So for those out there that think that we're going to regain control of processing of critical minerals and manufacturing of batteries, magnets, semiconductors, steel, it's not going to happen in 3 or 4 years. Like, we have to come up with a campaign to do this. And by the way, it's not going to be solved by the primes. In the defense side, or like USA Rare Earth, or MP Materials, or RE Alloy, you pick some of the big boys over in the critical mineral space. They're important, but we need to get junior miners involved in this. We need to get processing capacity. The Army's involved in this. I mean, I think it's incredibly important. And I'm passionate about it, because if we can't make batteries, and we can't make magnets, and we can't make semiconductors or fab them and protect them, we're going to have a hell of a time economically in the long haul. We have to regain those skills. Here's a statistic. 2029, 50% of the mining industry is going to be of retirement age. We're graduating maybe 300 metallurgists in this country a year. China is making more than 10,000 a year. People, those are people, okay, that are metallurgists. And we took all that rock crushing, toll processing, land management, physical separation, physical benefit. We just said, do it in China. We've got a problem, folks. And we need an end-to-end. I told this story to Chris yesterday. Sorry, I'll leave the company unnamed. they make magnets. You put 5 mason jars on the table. I was in there just listening to the CEO, there was a private equity guy over here, a VC guy. Magnets in jar 5, and then there's lumps of material in the other 4. And he got done talking. I said, which jar do you own? Supply-wise. He said from jar 3 to 4, and then the magnet. And these magnets are not family photo magnets. Okay, these aren't refrigerator magnets. These are F-22, F-35s, right? Phones. I said, where are the other 2 jars? He said, I don't know. It's processing. Without saying what he was saying was, that's made in China. So the raw materials we pull out of our dirt, and we pull iron ore out, we send it to China, process it and back. 90% of it, okay? So if we don't own that part of the supply chain, back to early 25, February and April, if we do something, the counter volley is not necessarily rockets and missiles, it's we're going to choke supply chain. And we're going to choke rare earth elements, we're going to choke critical minerals. Why? Because we own 90% of the processing. So if we want to regain end-to-end manufacturing, we need to go back and say, how do we control our raw materials? And then what are we going to do with the raw materials to store them like we do with oil? Well, we haven't been doing that with some of the other things. Penicillin. I mean, all the bio stuff. To me, I read about it, but it wasn't my job in uniform. And I was watching it and thinking, this is not good. But now that I'm out of uniform, this is the good part about being out of uniform. You can talk about this shit. You know?
You're a lot more vocal, sir. You're a lot more vocal.
Freedom! Liberating!
Look forward to that, sir.
All right. I'm probably done now.
Breakdown.
The challenge of multi-domain disruptions to command and control. Logistics relies on data. Cyber warfare, degraded comms, denied, interrupted, intermittent comms. The disruptions to command and control is a challenge. Resolution. How do we resolve? How do we address that?
Well, I mean, this is not just technology. I actually think my personal view on this is every exercise that we conduct out there, whether it's joint, Army, all the services, we have to put in place our combination of network architecture that we're going to fight off of. And I'm of the view, in fact, I think Huntsville plays a big role in this. I talked with Chris yesterday about we have the ability to extend a live, virtual, and constructive training range in the Western Pacific from the Rocky Mountains all the way to the Asian continent. The U.S. Army owns a sim center, a really good sim center in Korea, really good sim center in Sagami Depot in Japan, Guam, Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands, incredibly important site. Hawaii, Alaska, JBLM, Fort Carson, Colorado, San Diego. Now, everything I just mentioned to you there, there's a sim. Navy has a sim center in Fort Island in Hawaii. I don't think they have a sim center in Guam. But the point I'm making is the ability for us to be able to put live forces in that range, I'll call it that range complex, and have virtual and constructive wrap for every exercise, and be on the system that you're actually going to fight on. That's where we need industry's help. Because we can't set up a live, virtual, and constructive network that's for sims or for an exercise and then recreate something for war. We need to be on the war one and use that every day out there. And I think actually that's where industry could really help, and we could overcome a lot of problems with the tyranny out here. Because it's not just distance, it's the EMS, it's the information environment, it's your access, it's overflight, it's a range of things.
Other challenge, consumption disparity. High demand, special classes of supply. You've addressed this in comments earlier, but expand on it a little bit. Now we've resolved classified, supplying the ammunition and precision munitions.
Well,
particularly.
yeah,
Bulk fuel and medical supplies.
I mean, I think these recent operations in the Middle East and in Europe, are, they're a stark reminder that just in time for what? And so we need, but it's not stockpile, of course not talking, it's not stockpiles. It's the manufacturing capacity to be able to turn on a factory line and be able to say, I need you to go from 1 a month to 15 a month. And that's where some risk needs to be taken on investment, because we basically don't have that manufacturing backbone to turn it on that quickly. I mean, when one country owns 90% of the processing capacity, you've got a problem. And so you're going to have to return some of that. It's not going to, again, this part of it, I think, I'm very encouraged with the money that's being deployed, but when you look at like under the hood, are all the pistons firing? Are the belts moving? Is it well oiled? And I think that's the next chapter of what we need to be paying attention to, because I think that's what I get worried about.
The final challenge that I'm going to pose you with is the political and legal friction between allies and partners, weak multilateral frameworks, and operational sovereignty.
Yeah.
How does that address?
So, thanks for that question. I wasn't expecting, but I'm glad you did. But, I mean, back to and this is my shtick, okay? I mean, I know I'm known for this. But actually, one of the things that weathers all of the political unrest or rhetoric or debate or policy problems is military diplomacy, is exercises, okay? I'll tell you a story. There was a coup in Thailand, and the chief of the army at the time, obviously the king said, we're going to use the army to do what we need to do. So a lot of sanctions go in place, and the Department of State, et cetera, et cetera. The chief of the army in Thailand was a classmate of General Odierno from the Army War College. And he was the only person that was able to talk to a senior official in Thailand about what was going on and sort of keep the temperature down. And I say that because many of you may not realize this, Cobra Gold in Thailand, China sends 25 soldiers to Cobra Gold. They go and do the humanitarian assistance exercise part of it, because that's where they go and that's what they'll do. But we do that, and we do that with the consent of an ally, Thailand. And I guess the point I'm making here is that I think that one of the greatest strengths of the military and our exercises is our ability to continue to have back and forth dialogue, continue to have exercises, continue to train together, continue to send people to schools and do conferences, even though the political situation may be a bit murky, rusty, or unhealthy by way of debate. And so again, I think that gets challenging sometimes for diplomats, and rightfully so, because the State Department are having to lead in a diplomatic way. But the exercises go on, and the training goes on, and those relationships go on, and rightfully so. And I think that it really is a port in the storm during politically challenging times.
That's not often recognized for the strength that it brings to our nation's deterrence and to our nation's defense. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm thank you and round of applause. We're going to be taking about a 15-minute break. If you'll come back in and take your seats, this is about 25 after. 25 after 10, so we're back in. Thank you so much.